I'm Neil Cresswell, the CEO and co-founder of Portainer, a Kiwi. So Portainer, for those who don't know, is actually a company born down in New Zealand and still to this day engineered majority from New Zealand. But I'm a technical background, 25 plus years as a consultant, infrastructure background. So actually the biggest challenge is getting started. So if you think about the historical views of infrastructure has been driven a lot by virtual machines, either through VMware or other technologies, or cloud. And in the cloud world, you've got virtual machines or you've got cloud APIs, which you consume as functions. And they're quite polar opposite ways of building and managing applications. So when you look at containers, they're kind of halfway between a virtual machine type construct and a function type construct. And so a lot of people are like, well, hang on a second, is this a virtual machine, and do I manage a container like a virtual machine, or is it like a function that I consume? And well, hang on, it's neither and a bit of both. And interestingly enough, the technology that underpins a container platform, Docker, but more recently Kubernetes, it is a incredibly feature-rich piece of technology, but as a result, it's quite complicated. It very, very much relies on you having knowledge in order to securely and safely configure it for your use. If you don't have the knowledge, you don't know where to start. And so it's very much of you don't know what you don't know, and therefore you don't know how to get started. And Portainer just makes the capability immediately obvious. So this is what the products, the underlying technology can do. This is the capability you can enable, and we make it easy to enable it. So it helps you go from nothing to something without having to go and get a PhD in Kubernetes, and without having to be an absolute specialist in the technology. So we just enable you to get going.
Perfect.
Okay, so it's relatively easy, and I'm going to put that in speech marks, relatively easy to spin up a Kubernetes cluster. You can go to any cloud provider, put in your credit card, and you've got yourself a cluster in a few minutes. There's a couple of relatively simple commands for on-prem kube deployments, and it'll give you a cluster. And you can kind of figure your way through your first cluster. Once you start getting into 2, 5, 10, 100 clusters, all of a sudden complexity gets real deep real fast, because now you need to worry about RBAC control, so access control, and keeping it consistent across all your clusters. You need to worry about your policy, security controls, governance, not just one time, but now 10 times, 100 times. And so what normally might be something you can just sort of accidentally configure, or you can Google your way, or now AI your way to get one environment working, and you now have to do that 10 times, 100 times, and you have to do that consistently, it gets real complex real fast. And then when you mix that and say, well, now I want some on-prem, some cloud, multiple cloud providers, each cloud provider has a slightly different way of achieving the same result. Oh my goodness. And so Portainer sits across the top and says, well, hang on, let's give you a universal way to configure access control and security policy and governance and audit and everything else across any environment, anywhere, and then make that a really simple, intuitive way to configure it. So you don't have to understand how to configure Amazon roles and do the same thing in Google and Azure, and then try to figure out on-prem with Dex or anything else. You just like, okay, do it in Portainer, access, configured, propagated.
Excellent, cool.
So if you look at Kubernetes itself, right, Kubernetes itself has no notion of users. Yes, there are service accounts, but there's no notion of a user. And so in each Kubernetes cluster, you have to ordinarily install a authentication agent and configure all the RBAC, and each cluster has to be configured to go and authenticate users and grant them access to the cluster. And that's quite a painful exercise, because you have to make sure things are kept in sync, as we said just before. Portainer does things a bit differently. Portainer sits in between your users and the platform, and Portainer takes care of all of the authentication and access of users. It integrates with your corporate directories, with your dev authentication repos if you want. It'll authenticate and authorize a user, and the admins will say this user or this group of users has this particular role, right, privilege on this cluster or on this group of clusters. And Portainer takes care of creating shadow user accounts in the cluster and defining and propagating RBAC roles. So we take care of that user access and authorization federation across any cluster. But then also we make it really easy to deploy relatively advanced products like OPA Gatekeeper and write and deploy OPA Gatekeeper policies to the cluster. And what that translates to is it's very, very simple to do advanced role-based access and security policy control, but also governance. So you can stream all user activity logs to an external SIEM should you want, and that's all handled and managed by Portainer.
Excellent, cool.
Yeah, so Portainer has focused a lot on helping people configure and consume their Docker and Kubernetes environments. And with every container environment, there's the create, configure, and consume. Now, the create piece is how do you spin up a Kubernetes cluster or a Docker environment? How do you maintain and scale that environment? That sort of create piece has been historically something that we've kind of kept away from on purpose. So we decided to partner with Cedero and use their Talos operating system to natively spin up Talos-enabled nodes and form Talos clusters. And so we're here today on the Sunborn yacht to show off in real time how to build, scale, maintain a self-hosted Kubernetes cluster natively with Portainer powered by Talos. So Kubernetes has definitely crossed that chasm into the mainstream now, and so what we're seeing is more and more organizations coming on board and saying, look, we need to deploy an application inside containers and on a Kubernetes platform. Kubernetes is the de facto now. And or we're seeing dev teams saying we need to actually modernize our legacy applications if we want to run them in containers because it's the best way of doing so. And these are mainstream organizations, not what I would consider deep tech native organizations. And so there needs to be a way to make container management more accessible to the masses, more the IT generalist audience, and that is actually 100% what we focus on. We focus on enabling the IT generalists to do amazing things, superhuman things, and so that's where we're focused, and I think that's where the market needs to head. The ecosystem is still quite complicated. There's thousands of products that make up the CNCF landscape. It's quite complicated to decide which of those products you want to choose and adopt, and then once you've chosen and adopted, how do you maintain those? How do you lifecycle them? How do you teach your people to use 15 different tools that makes up your platform? Again, Portainer is one tool you learn. Once you've learned it, and it's very intuitive, once you've learned it, you can use it across any environment anywhere. So our goal is really there to try and remove obstacles to adoption, because that's what the mainstream need.
Excellent.